There we go.
Okay.
Gotcha.
Thank you, host. This technology here. Yeah, my name is Rosalinda Guillen, and I'm the founder of Community to Community Development. This is our 16th year organizing, community-based organizing in Whatcom and Skagit County, and also statewide, actually. So our organization is, well, can I read our belief statement?
Yes, please.
Kind of a mission, yeah. We believe that another world is possible, and we are active participants with other popular people's movements. We strive to reclaim our humanity by redefining power in order to end settler colonialism, capitalism, and patriarchy in their external and internalized forms. So what does this have to do with farm workers? I'm a farm worker that grew up in Skagit County, working in the fields. I'm the oldest of 8. We've all worked in the fields. My father's worked in the fields in the United States in corporate agriculture since he was 10. So Community to Community was founded from a farm worker perspective on how to transform the food system into a just food system, realizing that we're but one component, one part of an entire food system. And we believe we're an important component of the food system. But we also know that in order to change the food system, we have to engage all of you, all of the community, all of the eaters that have to eat the food that we are helping to produce. So our organization works on food sovereignty issues, sustainable agriculture, production, ecofeminist policy issues, and farm worker rights. And so we start from the base of the very basic rights of farm workers and on an everyday basis. We're based in Bellingham, Washington is our headquarters, but we also now have an office in Skagit County, and we actually do outreach and policy work statewide. We're a multi-issue, multicultural, women of color led organization.
Wonderful. Thank you for that introduction. And Edgar, do you want to share something about who you are?
Yeah. Good afternoon. My name's Edgar. I'm the political director for Familias Unidas por la Justicia, which is an independent farm worker union based in Burlington, Washington. I've been doing this role for roughly a year, even though we were around since the inception of the union in 2013, when 300, 400 farm workers, indigenous farm workers, went out on strike at Sakuma Brothers Farms and asked to have a union contract at this farm. And that set off a series of events that eventually, after 3.5 years of boycotting and picketing and work stoppages, they eventually were given the vote by the company and then ultimately won and now are working under a union contract. The union contract was first negotiated in 2016. We just renegotiated a new contract that extends for 2 more years. Currently, right now, we're in Yakima and in different parts of central and eastern Washington. We were asked to be here by workers that work in the apple packing sheds here. There's like so many here. We got here in May because of concerns of health and safety, especially of people getting sick with the coronavirus. They went out on strike and demanded that their employers do something to protect them. Some of the companies did agree on some terms, so that ended the strikes. However, there's still a group of workers here that are organizing to form their own union at one of the bigger apple packing sheds here in Yakima. So that's why we're here. We've now been here 4 months. So I was excited to hear that to be part of this conversation and invited here because, most of my knowledge about agriculture is also from, berries and cucumbers and stuff like that, knowing that apples is obviously Washington's number one export. And so much of the economy depends on it. So this is my first time, at least, engaging in kind of the world of apples and orchards and the big influence that their lobby groups have and these big, powerful mega farms have over the state. So glad to be participating here.
Thank you so much. And just a quick introduction, I work at Finnriver, but I also help run Jefferson County Immigrant Rights Advocates, which is a small volunteer-run nonprofit on the Olympic Peninsula. And so the work we're doing relating to agricultural labor out here mostly has to do with people working forestry jobs and people working fishing and shellfish jobs. So we're not really apple land out here, but still see some of the similar struggles I think that are happening on the other side of the state. And what we do is a lot of mutual aid, a lot of COVID relief. We were able to bring almost $200,000 to the Olympic Peninsula for COVID relief, which was a really wonderful thing. And we also do some LGBTQ asylum seeker sponsorship and a partnership that brings low-cost legal services to the Olympic Peninsula, to a lot of rural, underserved areas. So that's the work that I do out here. And I'm just so glad to be here with all of you. So thank you. Andrew, did you want to go ahead and talk about the tasting?
Sure. One of the things that brings us together right now and allows platforms to intersect and bring more folks into a conversation about agricultural workers is the hard cider in the United States. That is an industry that has been growing or seeing a boom for the last decade. To that end, we make cider. This is Finnriver's Black Currant. I have enjoyed a number of glasses. I made sure that our speakers also have glasses to facilitate in the way that beverages facilitate. Yeah, on you go. And in that context, do please enjoy. Take a moment. While we bring cider to the table, I am full of gratitude for the willingness of people to show up to this conversation and for the folks that are building community in this particular time, in this particular week, in this particular year, and for the last decade as well. Building community and building the fabric, knitting it back together after injury and injustice. These are important things. And to that end, to the community builders, I raise a glass. Thank you. Yeah, you're there, Courtney.
Yum. Okay. All right. Thank you so much, Andrew.
That's good. Yum.
Yeah. All right. So we got some more questions coming in here. And if anybody has any questions, please feel free to feel welcome to throw them in the chat box and we can throw them into the mix of questions we have going on here. But Edgar, we were talking about the struggles that have been going on since COVID outbreak that I think probably just really revealed what was actually going on that was problematic anyway. COVID was more of a open window to the things that were happening that were going badly already, right? The bad conditions. And so COVID just exacerbated those conditions and made them more obvious to the general public. Can you talk about, now that some of those agreements have been signed, what are conditions like for farm workers now out in Yakima and in the apple picking, apple packing world? Have conditions improved?
I would say it's a mixed bag.
Okay.
So in March, when the orders came down from the governor regarding, social distancing and staying at home, farm workers were excluded from those orders. They were told to keep going to work, even though, they were still going to work and still without no hazard pay or any personal protective equipment. So that kind of became a focus for the union. At that time, we were mostly focused for folks in Skagit County. That's where we were based. But then, we started getting reports from all over the state of people getting sick and these big outbreaks. And Wenatchee was one of the big ones at a farm called Stemilt, especially in housing. The housing where they bring in guest workers under the H-2A visa program, where here in Eastern Washington, there's got to be over 20,000 H-2A workers, and they all live in these cramped little cabins and, 10 or 12 people per room, which became a huge issue about you're trying to enforce social distancing, then it's going to be hard in those kind of conditions. So the outbreaks were happening. We were trying to do what we could in pressuring labor and industries and Department of Health and the governor's office to do something. But that help or those or rules or anything didn't arrive until I can say until like mid-June. But it was because of a series of lawsuits that Familias Unidas and C2C and Columbia Legal Services, we had to pressure all the agencies to look into agriculture and offer protection or do something to protect the workers, because just the impact of just being in Yakima, we saw it firsthand of how many people got sick and how many people passed away. And we're still here in Yakima, still trying to recover from that. And, it's a success here now to say that, only 50 people this week got sick. In the past, it was like 400, 500, 1,000. It was like that. So the conditions at least in personal protective equipment, at least in that end, there's some masks now giving out. However, the same treatment of abusive supervisors and that's still there. And now for the last 2 weeks, there's been wildfires. So now you see workers out there working for 8, 10, 12 hours a day picking apples. And we're still, it's still high potential for COVID outbreaks here. So there's a lot of things that still need to be addressed. But at least people have masks. And that's, I think, something. But we still have lots of work to do.
Yeah.
So I would like to add that even though some protections, everything that the workers have gained is because they fought, not because the state or the state agencies cared enough to do something about it. And what's being done is not enough. Once again, Familias Unidas through Columbia Legal Services tried to implement more ventilation in the housing of the H-2A workers. And we just got an email today actually from Department of Health and Labor and Industries, and they basically did nothing. What they did is not mandatory, it's not required, it's just out there. There's no enforcement. It's really dangerous still in Eastern Washington because of the H-2A workers not being protected, and that infections then go out into the rest of the community. So it's been a hard struggle of 4 months to even keep workers alive in the apple industry.
For our audience members that maybe aren't as familiar with the daily in and out of farm worker life, for those with H-2A visas and those who live here year round, can you give us a better idea, just for everyone, of what the challenges are just to survival in this time for families? Like, if someone gets sick, are they getting paid for time off, et cetera? Can you just give the audience like a better idea of what the challenges are to staying healthy in addition to living conditions, et cetera?
Well, we have the I guess you could say the announcement that farm workers are essential workers. That's actually turned out to be a pretty bad thing for farm workers, which means that they have to go to work. And the industry required that they go to work. They haven't stopped going to work.
Yeah.
The employers, for the most part, even now, are not implementing social distancing or any of the protocols that are demanding. What little they have implemented in regards to what the CDC and other folks are saying is because they've been forced to, but it's not across the board. It's like only certain employers, and only as long as they can get away with it. As long as they think they're being inspected, do they follow the policy? So things are pretty bad for farm workers right now, especially access to face masks, forcing the employers to social distance. If they get sick right now, a space for quarantining is really difficult for farm workers, whether H-2A or domestic farm workers or the families that live in Washington State. Farm workers are poor. They're one of the poorest workforce in the country, right? So they're poor. They're live in small apartments and small houses, crowded. And our culture is a family culture, familial culture. So we want to be together, and even if they want to be quarantining themselves, they can't. They have nowhere to go. I think it's like 60% of the farm workers are undocumented, which means they're not qualifying for any kind of financial benefit. They can't access unemployment or any of these other benefits. So things are pretty bad. When you add that to being an essential workforce, and then when you add that to labor and industries, Department of Health, and the agricultural industry having tremendous influence on regulations and safety regulations and oversight and enforcement, it's a deadly combination for our community. I don't know, Edgar, if you want to add something, because
No,
I'm going to take another sip.
I think that's exactly right, that if workers hadn't gone out on strike or gone on a huge caravan to Olympia and gone to the governor's done all these direct action things and made the taking those public actions, then nothing would have been done. Which is, again, for us, we were really wanting to see the departments and the agencies do thorough investigations, because we were seeing all the workers that were being sick, but yet the agencies, when they would go and do inspections, they would say that everything was okay at least in the warehouses or in the housing or everything. So we were kind of disappointed with all those things, and we had taken hundreds of petitions to all the agencies, and still nothing was being done. So it became kind of apparent that we were going to be here by ourselves, and had to figure out a way how to fight for all these things that people needed to feel safe.
I mean, the workers even did a car caravan to Olympia, right? To the governor's mansion and to labor and industries to try to get their attention to change things, and that didn't work.
Yeah. The only time, like, say, the governor sent his assistant or whatever twice here, and the workers just told him off and told him to get out of here. And it wasn't after the last strike was settled that the governor actually showed up and decided to put in resources into Yakima and Eastern Washington. But we were that was already, what is that? Was that 3 months in, 2 or 3 months March, when people were asking it since the get-go.
But it was also an embarrassment, I think, to the governor and the state that there was such a big spike of infections and sick people in the Yakima area, or that he never would have gone. And I don't know if there's any other questions, but I wanted to say that it's really important that Edgar and I are in this conversation with you, because a lot of the work that we do, focusing on ecofeminism and food sovereignty, is about self-determination in the food that we eat. And how, I mean, in my opinion, this cider tastes so much better because you produced it in a way that, as far as we know, you're not exploiting human beings or the environment. And for us, food sovereignty is about that. It's about self-determination about what we eat, being able to have the food sources that are good for us, both socially, and also health-wise, but also are not harming other creatures or humans or the environment, that's the ultimate goal. And if you're going to look at the food system now and trying to locate food products that you know for sure are not exploiting the environment or human beings, it's really hard. You could almost starve to death. So it's offensive when the governor goes to Yakima in the middle of a pandemic and talks about saving the food system and protecting the food system, when this corporate industry that's exporting apples is not the food system that they're trying to save. This is a profit, it's saving profit for a few corporate apple growers in Eastern Washington that have huge political influence. So it's good to be here with you to have this conversation because in many ways, in fact, food is political for us. As farm workers, eating and drinking and having food produced in a just and fair manner is a political act because there's so little of that out there. And I want to thank you all.
Mm.
Well, Rosalinda, I'm wondering if you could talk a little bit about C2C's relationship with the Agricultural Justice Project and your food justice, the food justice certification program. Is there anything you can tell us about that? I feel like that's really connected to what you were saying.
Absolutely. I mean, the Agricultural Justice Program, I'm one of the original founders of that project. Started way back. I started participating with the Agricultural Justice Project in 1999 when I was still with United Farm Workers. And we participated in the development of social justice standards. And so the Agricultural Justice Project is the only domestic fair trade label that actually included farm workers in the development of the standards and continues to include farm workers. We participate with them in updating the standards. So it's not like the kind of labeling that's produced and then that's it, right? It moves with the political moments, it moves with the changes and the flows of labor and the industry itself. It's what we call the gold standard of food justice certification of domestic fair trade, real domestic fair trade. It's the only one, and it's really difficult because, and we knew this from the very beginning, to have food produced in a fair and just manner is going to cost. It means workers have to have decent wages, a medical plan, fair treatment, the right equipment, safety standards that on a farm cost money. It needs to be organic, it needs to be sustainable. But it's possible to do it, and we've proven that it's possible to do it. So the Agricultural Justice Project is a leader in that, and the founders of it, Elizabeth Henderson and Michael Sly, way back when they were trying to develop the organic certification standards, they were part of the leadership on a national level that fought to have social justice standards within the organic labeling process with the federal government. And they lost that fight. The organic certification process does not have anything to do with labor at all. Nothing to do with labor. And they were heartbroken about that. And they immediately went to take another direction in trying to get social justice certification that included labor standards. So I just can't say enough about the Agricultural Justice Project, except to say that it is costly, right? I mean, it does cost people to have social justice in their workplace. And I think that this is where the Agricultural Justice Project tries to work with folks. And I just feel like there must be a way to do that. One of the best models of using the Agricultural Justice Project standards is Swanton Berries in Santa Cruz, California. It's a strawberry farm, and they are completely domestic fair trade with their workers. And it's an amazing example of what's possible. And I know that there's others across the country. Mm-hmm. So I urge you to call it. Elizabeth is great, or Michael, to talk about discussing that. how to implement domestic freight trade standards in your business.
Rosalinda, you just offered a strawberry farm as a model example. Could you either say that out nice and clear so that folks can take that and run, or type it in the chat box at your convenience?
Yeah, it's Swanton Berries. So I'll type it. Yeah.
Well, thank you for that, Rosalinda. And I wanted to jump back to something that you were talking about earlier, Edgar, when talking about the car caravans and farm workers on the ground protesting, striking, and talk about the consequences and some of the barriers to having your voice heard for the migrant farm worker, H-2A visa, undocumented community that's picking apples, picking fruit, etc. Can you talk a little bit more about the challenges for someone who doesn't have a legal immigration status to kind of making their voice heard?
Yeah, that's always one of the biggest barriers for people to take actions. That and, you know, being retaliated against and being fired for speaking up at your job. Here, because of the ag industry, it's the heart of the ag industry. Just across the street from where we're staying is the Washington Growers League and the Tree Fruit Association offices. So we have all these big players here that determine a lot of what happens in the state. So for workers that have been exploited and oppressed for many generations, to take that step of going and taking a public action against these huge powerful interests, it's you know, it's significant. It's not nothing. So I think that, but just I think taking that first step is always the hardest for workers. But once they do it, it's the commitment there and the willingness to fight and take on. It's something that's really powerful to see, because for the first time, many of the workers will probably be able to tell you exactly how their days are like, how their life has been, you know, how to fix it, how to fix things. So the barriers of taking on the powerful industry while worrying about if you're going to get ICE called on you or Border Patrol, or when you go back to work to have your have a E-Verify type program put on you.
Can you explain what an E-Verify program is, just for everyone?
An E-Verify, it's a federal program that workers, companies can opt in to verify legal status. However, we've been seeing it being used in agriculture as a retaliation mechanism to keep workers in place. So, you know, and we've seen it here already, like a couple times already, where some of the main leaders of the strikes and organizers, whenever the strikes ended, they went back and immediately they were asked for their to fill out paperwork to confirm their legal status. So, yeah, that's kind of how, but that's always worrisome. But once you decide to take, this is like one of the main things that I've been learning. Once workers decide to take collective action, that a whole bunch of new rules and regulations start applying to them, especially if they start acting and behaving as a union. That gives them extra protections. And once workers start hearing that, then they start taking more and more actions that are more direct and bolder, and seeing them lose that fear and just kind of like realizing that there's another amount of, there's almost like a freedom for them to do something that they've probably been wanting to do for like 20 years. Just seeing that is something powerful. And once that keeps going, once you see that, I think here our job as organizers is to feed into that and to make sure that that power doesn't dwindle down and they capitalize on that power. So, but the barriers are still there. I think it is hard to kind of convince workers that they have a lot of power once they're united. And the industry knows how to manipulate that and use it to their advantage. But for being here just for these last couple of months, we're starting to make some wiggle room and starting to like break through some of that. And that's the exciting part of being here in Yakima for this amount of time and with these group of workers. And it's setting off a ripple effect everywhere. So not just in Yakima, now it's in Pasco, Okanagan, and Wenatchee, Skagit, all over the state and all over the country. Farm workers are always reaching out because they want to also do something like this.
I wanted to say that if it wasn't for the union showing up, supporting the workers, that movement would have been crushed really fast. I think what Edgar is explaining is those rights. When they showed up, they were able to explain all these rights to the workers that were on strike in a way that was understandable and had empathy, and they believed what the workers were saying and stood by them, and they gathered other support from the community and statewide support for those workers. So I think it's really important that the community, that supporters, that allies, white allies especially, call the governor's office, Department of Labor and Industry, and the companies themselves and say, we're watching. We know what's going on, because they count on being able to exploit and abuse farm workers without people knowing what's going on. And that happens a lot. With the presence of Familias Unidas por la Justicia, that has changed. So everything becomes very public. And I think that this is what's been really inspiring about the workers in Yakima. And also the organizing work. I just want to, say that Edgar and Ramon being there, that they're probably some of the best farm worker organizers in the nation right now. I mean, people are really reaching out to them. I know he's humble, but they're doing really good work because they're with the people and they listen and they act on what the workers want to do. And I think that that's really important to acknowledge, that farm workers will fight harder if they know that they have support and somebody's validating that the exploitation they're suffering is real and that it does demand strong action to fix it. And that's what's happening right now in the Yakima Valley.
And that was, I think, one of the feeling that when we got here was that it was kind of, it's like almost like that movie, was it Waiting for Superman? That people thought that when we got here that everything was we're gonna come and save the day, but it wasn't like that. We told them, like, we're not here to tell you what to do. Like, you're supposed to tell us what to do, and we'll support your decisions. So I think that was also an eye-opening kind of moment for everybody here, that somebody here wasn't, probably the first time, was gonna allow the workers to determine their own destiny and their own future, and them having the power to decide what they were going to do altogether, I think was really also really powerful to see. And now we're still feeding into that and having that grow, where workers know that we're not here to save anybody, that we're only here to support, and whatever you want to do, we'll support it.
Mm-hmm. Well, I think that's a great, and I know you just started touching on this also, Rosalinda, is how then, if we can tie this back into the cider world, the cider enthusiast world, the cider maker world, what would your recommendations be for how can those communities across the state, I mean, I guess that's a national thing, but if we're just looking at Washington State, how can they help advocate for farm workers' rights? How can we tie into supporting those voices that are, saying what they want, the workers?
I think it's important for you, first of all, to know that we consider the apple, that it matters how the apple is produced, and how the apple gets from the orchard to the consumer, whether it be, applesauce or cider or whatever, that it does matter. It makes a difference to the community as a whole. I think it makes a difference to the economy of how a product lands at your table or ends up at your table. And it's not about these mega corporations that exist right now in Washington State. That is like the worst way for an apple to be produced. It's about, for us, it's about, you know, small, localized, creative farms and farm production with the workforce. I think that the Domestic Fair Trade Association and the Agricultural Justice Project, it's about that partnership between the producer and the worker, that together they're going to produce a product. And I think that that's the important conversation that needs to happen, that the apple that's coming from, it's really like mono agriculture in Eastern Washington. If you go look at the orchards, I mean, I'm sure you've all seen them. It's mono agriculture produced with toxic chemicals without any input from any workers. It's just like it's factory production of an apple that's coming out that's not a real apple anymore. You know, it's got wax, it goes all over the world. It's not even a food product locally anymore. I think it's really important to know where the apple that made this cider comes from. Mm-hmm. And in the peninsula where you're at, keep an eye out for these big corporations, because they're looking for land. They're like vultures going out, and they even have blueberries in Eastern Washington now, where you never saw blueberries in Eastern Washington before. They were over here on the West Coast. Now they're like acres and acres and acres of blueberries in Eastern Washington, and irrigating. I mean, it's nuts, you know, what they're doing to the environment. So I think that it matters. It matters where the apple comes from that you're using for your product, and how it's produced, and how it gets to this beautiful bottle of delicious cider.
Could I take a moment to speak to that? I appreciate the support that you give to these bottles of cider. They're made with organic apples that come through a processing facility and are all organic Washington State apples. We're hitting an organic standard, but we are not hitting that social justice in agricultural labor standard. We are pushing to make something that is pure and beautiful and has heart and has deeper connection, which is one of the points that brought us all to this conversation, 100%. And there's a spectrum in the apple industry, by all means, of various ways of producing. We have 12 acres of orchard here in Chimacum, Washington, and we are working to produce our own. But this bottle I chose specifically because it's made with Yakima Valley Granny Smith and Pink Lady apples, and it's made with black currant juice that is packaged and produced in the Yakima Valley. And those things together, this represents our connection to the people who work in the apple industry across the board, from the folks who are running irrigation lines or harvesting or into the packing houses and into the apple pressing and the processing world, all the way into the truck drivers who are bringing it to my doorstep so that I can make my value-added product and make it look beautiful here. And I would really like to be able to track back to make it look beautiful all the way through the process.
I think that's a really important and powerful piece of information you just shared, because for the most part, workers don't ever see where their apples go. You know, for the most part, everything goes into China or Asia or anywhere other than the local market here. So workers never get to see themselves as connected to the product that they're or the fruit that they're producing and laboring for. But just like you explaining where the apples came from, and I think just for Yakima workers to hear like, oh, well, I probably did that. I probably picked and processed some of these apples. That also is part of this whole change, I think, that Rosalinda was talking about self-determination and food sovereignty. I think those are parts there where people can actually see their work being valued and also treated as such, not just like thrown away or, you know, thrown into a pile somewhere to rot. That they want to know that their fruit that they're picking and they labored for 10, 12 hours a day is getting put to use in a way that's well, in this case it's done with a lot of care.
And beautiful.
Yeah.
I mean, I think what you just said is like, it's possible to do it in the Yakima Valley. They're just choosing not to because of profit making. And so our families, our community gets decimated and exploited because of that. Even though I know a lot of the farm workers know it's possible because they know the earth, they know how to grow, they know how to do that work. And I think that's the struggle that we have. It's like, how do we do that transformation together? And I believe that the only way to really do that, have that transformation, is to be working with producers as partners in the long-term transformation of our food system. Not just be like machines and beasts of burden for a big profitable corporate entity, that's going. I mean, you said 12 acres. Well, heck, some of these farms have 12,000 acres. One farm is easily in Eastern Washington has 12,000 acres. That's insane. Sucking up the water from the Columbia River, it's just nuts.
Mm-hmm. Well,
I don't know if there's any more questions.
There are, yeah. We've got one in the chat box that it asks.
Okay.
I've had a couple of questions about, can anyone speak to how, if and how conditions are different on farms that are certified organic versus conventional? Have you guys had any experience witnessing conditions on different farms? I know scale probably has a lot to do with it, just when you're talking about very large farms.
I think scale has a lot to do with it, because we've seen a lot of exploitation on there are large corporate organic farms.
Yeah.
In California, there's a lot, and the exploitation on production standards and production quotas, wages, and exhaustion exist, but as the workers will always say, but we're not being poisoned, with the pesticides. So there's always that threat from conventional farms of the impact, the cumulative effects of pesticides and toxins on the human body. That's always present on conventional farms. So, we see all the time sickness, physical injuries. The lifespan of a farm worker, I don't know if I mentioned it, in the United States today is 49. Wow. There's low back injuries that will disable a worker at the age as early as 25. Mm-hmm. And that disability will prevent them from any kind of labor into the future. So, there's all sorts of injuries in corporate agriculture. Rotator, the shoulder injuries, lower back injuries, carpal tunnel syndrome. I think in the packing sheds, right, Edgar, the carpal tunnel is huge. Mm-hmm. From the conveyor belts of sorting apples. Mm-hmm. I don't know if you want to speak to some of those injuries in the packing sheds. It's really bad.
Yeah, foot problems and knee problems, and there is no real retirement plan. So you can see people there working till their retirement age, or if they're lucky enough to retire. So yeah, you have a kind of like a sad situation where you have elderly people, they're still working and expected to produce and keep up with the line speed, which is like almost inhumane speed. So yeah, you do see a lot of those injuries, and people never take time to rest because they're afraid of losing their income. Mm-hmm. So that's one of the big concerns that we're here, and people talk about it all the time, about how they want to do things to change things for especially the elderly people that have basically given their life for all these companies to prosper while they're barely getting by.
I wanted to say that on small farms, the relationship between the workers and the employer are different. They are more community-based, and smaller farms, it's a different type of relationship where there's more consideration, more empathy. And then relationships do get built in the smaller farms, you know, in some of the rural areas, whether they're organic or conventional. There is a difference between working on a small farm versus these corporate agricultural corporations. There's a big difference. It's still not necessarily what needs to happen, because family farmers are just as poor and have less access to resources. It's like the farm workers, right? Most small family farmers work alongside the workers, and they're strapped for providing better wages and benefits. They don't have any themselves most of the time. So I think it's more of the big guys, the big agricultural corporations out competing the small family farmers. My frustration is that small family farmers are not fighting back. They're not fighting back the big corporations. And we would gladly join that fight if they pushed back on the big corporations. But we haven't seen that. We haven't seen that struggle happen at all.
Well, this actually leads in really well to one of the questions coming from the chat box. This question says, last week at our farm, us workers pooled together a day's wages, Familias Unidas por la Justicia. Checks will be in the mail. And we started drafting a solidarity letter to send to the Department of Labor and Industries and elected officials in Washington. Are there specific policy demands we should include in our solidarity letter that would fit with y'all's organizing needs?
That's great.
Yeah, that's awesome.
Yeah, thank you.
Well, one of the big policy issues, I mean, just something as simple as having ventilation at housing units is a huge fight. So that's been one of the main, right now, our main concentration, if we're talking about policy or pressure, L&I and Department of Health to implement something to improve ventilation and worker housing. So that's one. And I don't know, what are the other ones, Rosalinda?
I think just stop the importing of H-2A workers into Washington State. That is a quasi-slave labor program. The H-2A program is a quasi-slave labor program. We can send you the links to look at the history of that and the abuses that happen. We believe that there is no worker shortage in Washington State. They're bringing those workers in because they have no rights to organize, no rights to strike. They have no ability to complain or improve their working conditions. So another big ask is to stop importing contracted workers from Mexico into Washington State. They're not needed. And if they're needed, the industry needs to prove that they're needed. So that's a big policy change that we believe Washington State can make. The other big issue is, I think, mentioning in your letter that the Department of Labor and Industries and the Department of Health has marginalized protections and enforcement for farm workers in general. It was already bad before the pandemic, and it's worse now. So it's like sending in the letter, basically acknowledging that the Department of Labor and Industries, Department of Health, and the governor's office has marginalized brown farm workers. It's a racist infrastructure with regulatory structure within these agencies. It really is racist the way that they don't enforce and the way they lay out regulations. Basically, the emergency rules that were implemented were almost word for word what the industry was asking. Even though we put forth recommendations and based on science and health data of why they should do things a certain way. And the governor and the Labor and Industries and Department of Health still went with what the agricultural industry wanted, what the big players wanted. So it was a political move based on profit making. And I think, saying that in the letter, that as consumers in Washington State, the behavior and the attention that the Washington State agencies have given to protect farm workers is shameful during this pandemic. And that needs to change immediately. I'm just like, if you get me started, I could go on for hours on their on what they've done, which is bad. They've sacrificed farm workers to continue their profit making in their apple exports this year with no pause, no change at all from what they did last year.
It's also interesting that it's like, I think it's like 6 big companies like determine everything for the Apple industry. So that's also a power imbalance, especially if small producers or mid-scale producers are trying to compete. These 6 big corporations get to determine whether or not they'll be viable or not.
I think, looking for a way to give more power to small producers in general in Washington State. We believe that needs to happen somehow, but small producers have to fight for that. And we'll stand with small producers if they ask for our help, but they don't even want us near them because they're afraid of the big corporations' power attacking even small producers. So that's a huge fight that needs to happen, in my opinion.
Well, we've got a couple more questions in the chat box. If we can just grab a couple more in here while we've got time. One person is asking, are any of the packing houses unionized?
No.
From being here, I think no. I don't think there's one that's been unionized. I think there was 1 or 2 that were unionized, but they got voted out or got decertified because of company meddling. But if we are able to succeed with the union that we're trying to form here, it'll be the first one in a long time. So hopefully within the next couple of months, we'll be able to get a victory here.
Okay, awesome.
I mean, there is one, there's a vineyard, Chateau Saint Michel, Stimson Lane Wines in Preston, Washington, is unionized. The farm workers have a union contract that work in the vineyards, and also the production facilities that bottle the wine are also unionized with the Teamsters. So and that's about the only unionized agricultural production, facility in the whole state of Washington. That's it.
Edgar, as a cider producer and as a cider consumer, and an eater of apples and pears, what kind of support can be offered from a distance to support your work in bringing unionized labor forces into the packing houses or into the various workplaces in the Yakima Valley?
Yeah, and I think that's something where the solidarity component comes into, where if people that are buying the apples and really care about the quality of the apples and organic and all the social justice standards, then you have to let the companies know that that's something that you really care about, the treatment of the workers, that you're not just gonna buy any apple, that you really want to, if you're gonna pay top dollar for a product, then it has to be, it has to meet certain standards that you believe in. And I think with that, they'll know that the things that farm workers are asking for, it's not just farm workers, it's all these other people and other communities that they would never expect to also be asking and demanding for these things. And I think that's one of the best ways, and making it public and saying that this is the things that we want to see out of our apples or the products that we're buying.
So a letter to Allen Brothers actually right now would be really good.
Yeah.
Allen Brothers is the packing shed that's really more organized and moving towards unionization. I think a letter to Allen Brothers saying that you're watching and you're in support of the workers unionizing, even something on your Facebook or, with that solidarity that's very public that we can share, that the union can share and we can share at C2C and other folks. Community Alliance for Global Justice in Seattle is really supportive, and they do really good work pushing stuff out on social media and promoting even your cider or, your company, but also your solidarity for the workers at Allen Brothers. I think right now that would be really a powerful statement.
Yeah. And I think that a lot of the people or the companies here are banking on that none of this will go out into other parts of the state, that'll just be contained here. But if other parts of the state and other people from other places, that has a huge impact, because they know people are watching and paying attention, and that they'll have to behave better.
I have another question that's related. Has it been possible for cider makers to include a premium in their sales pricing to benefit farm workers unions? Or I'd broaden that just to farm workers in general.
I don't think anybody's thought of it that I've seen.
No.
But I mean, what we've talked about with the Agricultural Justice Project is a label, a social justice label that's a gold standard, then requires that the product costs more. And people should be able to understand why, right? So I think that it should be totally possible. And I think that that's something to think about in relation to policy about, you know, within the Washington State Department of Agriculture, or even, you know, which area of the state of Washington would we be able to have that kind of a premium for products that are produced sustainably and that are supporting the economy by lifting workers' wages and workers' economic well-being. That's actually a very interesting concept to think about.
Thank you. Okay.
Where do you sell your products? I mean, does the Bellingham Community Food Co-op sell the cider?
We do have my Washington sales ambassador in the audience. Perhaps she can throw that in to verify, but we are represented in Bellingham in basic notions. Yes, we do, says Chelsea.
Yeah. What about the Skagit Co? I mean, I want to get more cider.
Yeah, and I'm pretty sure if there's a place in Yakima here, I can let some of the workers here know that this the Finnriver cider, it's used from apples from here, and I'm pretty sure they'll be really excited about it.
Edgar, as soon as we fix the the throttle control switch on our farm truck, I'll have a truckload out to your particular hotel room in a short bit of time. I've been hatching that plan for about a week and a half now. Give me a moment and I'll make that reality for sure. But yeah, we will see what we can do to provide some information about where things can be found. It feels difficult to encourage folks who are working with the fruit to bring it to the process to make a value-added product, and then encourage them to spend their necessary funding on the value-added product that costs more, because we're trying to relate it back to social justice issues and ecological issues and things like that. I appreciate the sentiment, and we'll do what we can to try and make that a bit more accessible.
You'd be amazed what farm workers do to support each other and to give solidarity to those that have given them solidarity.
Yeah.
We have learned, well, it's something we already knew. Edgar and I are both farm workers. And so, you know, we've been in this a long time, and farm workers know when it's genuine and legitimate support, they will also give back. So don't underestimate us. But I think, you know, pushing out a product within our networks to make sure that you do well, because if you do well, you're going to support our struggle, is important to us. That's solidarity, right? So we'll do the best that we can if we get, you know, push it out to our networks. Hey, I just won the James Beard Award this year. Why not the James Beard Foundation? They should know about your company.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Bring it.
Yeah. Seriously.
I mean,
there's ways we can help each other.
I see a couple of brainstorming sessions on the way.
Yeah, absolutely.
Courtney, do you feel like we've covered what we set out to cover tonight? It's been about an hour, and I'd like to just be conscious of what we're trying to do.
Yeah, I think unless you or either of our guest speakers have anything else they really want to share with our audience, I think that, yeah. We really
Sorry.
appreciate you joining us.
Well, I just on the chat box, there's this update from the folks at La Familia. I think it's worth mentioning that. And if the person who posted that is on the call, I'd love to just hear a little more about them and that if we have a minute.
Oh, sure. Christy, do you want to introduce yourself since you're talking?
Forgive me. Hi, everybody. I work with Andrew and Courtney. I'm one of the co-founders at Finnriver. And I'm sorry I interrupted, but I just seems like really good information there on the side. Thank you so much.
Oh, so good. I'm glad you did. Yeah, so I can just read to everybody what these comments say unless the person who posted this to speak up. It says, the owners of La Familia in Oregon started out as farm workers, and now they donate to help community members with their immigration costs. And it's La Familia Cider. It's in Oregon.
Oh,
So,
Thanks, Annalise.
yeah, heads
we
up
need to
on
build
that.
a network, a cider network now.
I know they also have something of a cider club that allows for regular subscription pickups in La Familia in a way that you can support your cider habits however they may manifest, and also support their process and then their support and solidarity with immigration costs, as they point out there at their website. It's cool things.
That's great. La Familia.
Andrew, I don't know if as we're closing here, just to get more ideas out there in the conversation, if you wanted to talk about the fundraising bottle project at all, if that was something you felt like public. But I feel like that's another interesting way to, make an added value product.
Yeah, I think I would speak about it a bit more generally as far as cider makers in the cider industry, companies. The ability to mark up an end-of-the-line retail product to the consumer is a perfectly feasible way to extract money from the end user, right? We can pull a donation from each consumer that is going to, say, buy a bottle of cider. And I think that there is also, there are also pathways and frameworks for other players downstream before it gets to that retail location to also then contribute from their profit line. So we get a touch of the profit from the consumer who is choosing to donate for whatever reasons have pulled their heartstrings, as well as potential for donations from the producers, a potential from donations from even truck drivers who are transporting bulk products, as well as the distributor world in the alcoholic beverage industry. And then we can move back down the line from that retail sale and draw lines back into those communities that are supporting the value-added product process all the way through. Finnriver's been working on it, and I don't know that I'm ready to speak and center that as an idea at the moment, but I know that folks are doing it, and we can redirect resources throughout the process stream to support people throughout the process stream, and make sure that we have justice and equity and authenticity throughout that process all the way back from the folks who might be drinking on an evening.
Right. So it's kind of like localized fair trade type of process. We have a really good relationship with Boundary Bay Brewery. They make beer. So they could sell your cider there. And we're working with them they're trying to figure out how to help raise money for community to community also. So there might be a joint effort there. We should talk about that. So yeah, we should have like a brainstorm session. That's something that Liz could help pull together. So we can have a big fundraiser all together.
I'll reach out through Liz and make sure that appropriate connections are made.
Thank you very much.
Yeah. Any other last words from Courtney, Edgar, and Rosalinda before we break this off? Last thoughts? We good? Okay.
Well, I'm really thankful to be invited. I didn't know what to expect at first, but yeah, this has been really eye-opening and just gives us hope. It's always good to have people out there that are willing to support in any way. So thank you for that.
I just want to say that in this Black Lives Matter moment, it's good to have white allies that are really allies, and that you're paying attention to us. I'm thankful, and I'm agreeing with Edgar that it's good to be among friends during a difficult time. It's really difficult for us right now with people getting sick and dying, and the attacks we're getting from the corporate agricultural industry. So it is good to be among friends and have this discussion and lift a glass with your cider. Thank you very much. It really is special for us.
My pleasure. My honor.
Maybe we can bring our faces, Andrew, and just smile at each other for a minute. Sorry to interrupt you.
Bring some faces. Mm-hmm.
Yeah, I love cider.
I have a platform in which to speak, and hoping to be able to further conversations. Frank Adeo has joined us, and he works at South Puget Sound Community College, and I'll be speaking with him perhaps in a similar format later in Cider Week, I think a week from today, to talk about educational pathways and the barriers that are presented or being removed by various educational institutions, helping people become makers, and looking at the disparities that exist in who is doing the making and the crafting at the end of this value-added process stream. So more conversations to come, and absolutely honored and overwhelmed with the potentials that come from a simple conversation. Thank you both very much.
Ramon would like to be a producer. It's like him and Edgar already made blueberry wine from the Tierra Libertad berries. So, yeah. Anyway, thank you so much.
My pleasure.
Hopefully we'll talk again.
Yes.
Bye.
Bye. Thanks.
Bye.
Thanks. This is delicious, by the way. I wanted to say that. This is really, really good. Edgar, did you try it?
I couldn't get it open. I didn't have a bottle opener.
Oh my God.
But
All right. Well, it's really good.
I'm going to share it with the worker committee.
Okay. All right.
Yeah.
All right. Bye.
Bye.
Bye, Lisa. I haven't seen you in a while. Bye, everybody. Good to meet you all.